Good afternoon, good morning, Cert3 Glendale Community Services. Hope you're doing okay. Just going to do another instalment for the knowledge assessment for the homelessness unit. And we're up to part 6, Child Protection Domestic Violence Quiz. So I might just start with a few little definitions, specifically from an organisation called the Y Foundations, and they did some reporting on the state of youth homelessness recently to the New South Wales government, and they just wanted to draw in their report, just made a few things clear about in 2019 the New South Wales government's Department of Family and Community Services, that's FACS, and the Department of Justice merged and they became the Department of Communities and Justice. So that included juvenile justice being renamed youth justice, and that was combined with child protection and out-of-home care division to form a new division within the Department of Communities and Justice named Child Protection and Permanency District and Youth Justice Services. Now it's all a bit of a mouthful, but I guess basically instead of saying juvenile justice, they're going to say youth justice in that space, and instead of saying FACS, which we used to, Family and Community Services, which was DOCS, then FACS, they're just replacing that with child protection. So I guess the main thing out of that, it's Department of Communities and Justice as the overarching thing. If we're under that, we wanted to talk about juvenile justice, we might say youth justice, so the kids in detention or under court orders. And if we wanted to talk about what we might have called docs or facts, they're going to say child protection. A little bit of, I guess, trying to clarify that and perhaps getting it in my head as well, some of the new language and terminology for government departments, which has been a moving feast and continues to be. Also a little definition in this same report. So children and young people, so under the Act that is responsible for child protection. Young people are those aged 16 to 18, and 15 and below are children. They also use the term adolescents to talk about ages 10 to 19, taken from a World Health Organisation. They've also made a little distinction about in that out-of-home care space. So out-of-home care caseworkers refers to people in non-government organisations contracted by the New South Wales government to, I guess, provide care and protection for children living away from parents, basically, in some sort of out-of-home care. And so that's places like Allambie and Premier, sort of workers in that space primarily. And then they're talking about their child protection caseworkers. So they're largely employed by government Department of Communities and Justice in that child protection space. And their primarily role is investigating those allegations and around care and protection of children, safety of children. Well, a couple of little terms I'm worth looking at. Complex needs, they've given a little definition on that. So that includes, I guess, in the youth space, but it could encompass mental health, physical, cognitive and intellectual disability, AOD issues, behaviour issues, family dysfunction, and that whole broad spectrum under social, cultural, educational and economic issues that lead to disadvantage. So quite a big gamut there under complex needs. And specialist homeless services is worth, I guess, just outlining. So SHS, so under the Specialist Homelessness Services Program, the New South Wales government funds non-government organisations to deliver homelessness services, including youth homelessness services. And they just made a distinction. Not all homelessness or housing providers are funded under SHS necessarily. That is the name of the government funding body or bucket of money that the government allocates to various services who provide homelessness and accommodation options. So I'll get into question 1, which says, if a family with children or young people is homeless and attends your agency and they have been sleeping rough with nowhere safe to sleep, what are your child protection obligations? So we just heard that definition around children and young people in that age, so children 15 and under, young people 16 to 18. So our child protection obligations. We're mandatory reporters as professionals and workers in the field. And under that Act, the Children and Young Persons Care and Protection Act 1998, we are obliged to report. I guess what's interesting on the question and the idea that yes, we do mandatory report, but we also strive to build rapport with the parents and caregivers and linking into emergency services. So it's not just, oh, I've got a report. It is that communication skills, building rapport. We've got to remember how people are feeling, vulnerable, scared, complex needs, if you like, all those sort of things impacting. So we do need to work hard to build that rapport, obviously. And I guess for me, that language of when, I guess being honest and upfront, yeah, we do have to report, but it is about getting extra support and extra services as partly why, what's behind that thinking. It's about keeping people safe. It's not about punishment. Obviously about acknowledging their fear and worry, I guess, and concern around that. There are some numbers that we can access on the website, but that government website, really good information there around reporting, and those numbers there, the 132111 or sending the e-report, which you looked at the other day through the MRG process. So that MRG, the Mandatory Reporter Guide. Also, just mentioned earlier, the Communities and Justice Department. There's some really good stuff on their website. Just having a looking at that there, Communities and Justice, and there's some sort of those little boxes there. They all open up with more info. So whether it's around domestic and family violence or housing and homelessness, access to information, things like that. So that really good. So question 2, which 2 answers explain why mandatory reporting can be challenging for those working with homeless families who may have experienced trauma themselves? So I guess that what they're alluding to there is that as a worker, you may have your own lived experience, and so it could be challenging, I guess from a psychological viewpoint, perhaps bringing up traumatic memories, which is all very natural and understandable, of course, and it's sort of something as a worker you may have to put in some strategies to manage, whether that's self-care or professional supervision, debriefing with colleagues, talking things out, having a really good boss and supervision. That's all part of that process. So I guess C, they're saying in their answers, is mandatory reporting obligations can impact on trust a client may feel towards engaging in any service. So, and I guess I mentioned that earlier, so but being upfront and honest and acknowledging that it's about extra support, but that could be a challenge as a worker, feeling that, yeah, it's going to be hard to develop trust, when we're seen to be dobbing or whatever, however the negative connotations might be. But I just keep coming back that it's about extra support, and of course we've got the legal responsibilities. They've also provided a second answer in B. Parents may have had difficult encounters with child protection or justice services in the past and fear their children being placed in care. So there's certainly the fear of the parent or the caregiver, which it's not slightly out of sync with the question, because I thought it was asking about, as the worker, what might be challenging for workers in that space. But anyway, I mean, I don't disagree with that contention, that certainly it's challenging for parents thinking that their children may be removed. And I guess from a lived experience perspective, yeah, you could empathise with that for sure. So that would be challenging, I guess, if you're, putting yourself in the shoes of someone who's worried about having their children move. And again, that's another emotional impact, but we can't go past, honestly, but with all our communication skills as well, to build up that rapport and empathy and being honest in what it's all about. And it's not about punishment, it's about support if we have to report. Number 3, when building rapport with a family with children at risk, what mitigation strategies can you put in place to build trust, given your mandatory reporting status? So they're asking, what can we do to build rapport, and how do we do that? And I guess it's that being active listening, being non-judgmental. We're working with vulnerable people, which I spoke about previously. Really good communication, but being open and honest is important as well. But we're active listening, we're open to listening, where working from that strengths perspective, I think, is important, but we've got to be honest and clear about our mandatory reporting obligations. It's the law, we have to do it, but it is about getting extra support, and I keep coming back to that point. So, and I guess part of that process is advocating as best as possible as we can for and with people who are vulnerable, at risk, doing it tough, homelessness. So A and C. A and C for number 3 in part 6, A and C. So question 4 in part 6, it's around domestic and family violence. Domestic and family violence is a significant risk for homelessness at 2 points: the point of leaving the abusive relationship and the point of exiting crisis accommodation, which to answer best explains why this is the case. And this sort of takes us back to our role play, if we like, where Mary and Erica, that point of leaving is very traumatic and vulnerable, and we spoke about that, the high risks if a partner, an abusive partner, and a potentially violent partner finds out that there are plans to escape. We can only imagine that the danger that may put the person, women, children, dependents, generally speaking, in most cases, into at risk of being hurt or worse, who are trying to escape violence. So it's when leaving, it's a very vulnerable time. And I guess you're leaving and there is no guarantee that you've got secure accommodation to go to, and that could put you at risk of homelessness as well. So that's B. And the other answer, D, it's about if you do access crisis accommodation and you're there for a shorter amount of time, and you might get a few extensions, but getting into some other alternative accommodation can be challenging. So whether that's obviously the private rental market is expensive, the waiting lists for other supported accommodation, medium to longer term, could be very, very, we know the waiting lists are high. So point of exiting crisis accommodation is also a point of vulnerability. So yeah, because of those long waiting lists, that's D. So 5 was about the legal systems. Working with people exiting homelessness in the legal system can be complex. Choose true or false for each statement regarding different aspects of the legal system. The first one, I would say that it is okay to change the locks to keep a violent person out when there's an ADVO in place. So the answer would actually be false, because they're saying it is illegal, but it is legal. B, it's talking about the New South Wales Civil and Appeals Tribunal, ANCAT. ANCAT, yes, they can help in this situation, because ANCAT is the main forum for resolving tenancy disputes between landlords and tenants in New South Wales. And tenancy disputes can include payments of the bond, rent increases, unpaid rent, termination of the tenancy agreement, compensation, repairs and other breaches of the agreement. So yeah, under that one, those repairs, etc., certainly covered there. That next one about having an ADVO in place. You don't need an ADV in place to get crisis accommodation. So that one's false. And yeah, you get crisis accommodation before an ADVO perhaps gets in place. One that may not get put in place, you can still access crisis accommodation, crisis housing. Subsidised housing does help women escaping domestic and family violence, and certainly subsidised housing basically will help all vulnerable groups. And when housing is inaccessible, it does not help any vulnerable person. So that last one is true. Therefore, 5D, that's got one more question in this section, 6. Indicators of issues or indicators of risk, I'll summarise it as. So if we've got signs of drug use, intoxication, so that might be the risk factor, might be substance use. I'm going to say use, or it could be an addiction, but they've used the language substance abuse. If you've got a bruising and showing signs of fear and distress, the risk factor could be domestic and family violence. And the last one, households where violence is known to occur and there are children present. So that is the child protection space, which we spoke about earlier. Okay, thanks for listening. We've got through that section. I'm not sure whether I'll get the next section up in one video or two, or we do it in class. Let's just see how we go. But thanks for paying attention, and I'll say toodle pips.